Hi everybody. Once again, thank you for attending this webinar, the Holy Grail of Sales Enablement. We're going to start the presentation now. We've got a number of attendees. What I'd like to do is start off the webinar by introducing our speakers. I am Mark Padgington, Business Development Director, Australia and New Zealand at TrustSphere, and it's my pleasure to invite Manish Goel, CEO of TrustSphere, Forrester Research Senior Analyst Stephen Wright, RSVP Selling Creator Tony Hughes, and CRM Online CEO Glenn Richmond as they discuss a revolutionary approach to strategic selling. We will discuss how to combine the four critical components of sales enablement into one effective sales execution strategy. The webinar is being recorded, and within 48 hours you'll receive an email with the recording. I will now hand over the reins to Stephen Wright from Forrester to share with us his challenges faced in today's highly competitive sales environment. Over to you, Stephen.
Great. And happy to be here today. Thrilled that you've been able to join us. You'll be able to talk about this very important topic as we go through with it. And at Forrester, we're really about working with business and technology to look at the kind of customer-obsessed strategies that can help you drive growth, and that certainly is germane to today's session. I want to focus on enabling the consultative seller, and I think you'll see as the webinar goes on how this clearly relates to the other topics that we'll be looking at. A little bit about me. Joined Forrester about 5 months ago from a long history at IBM and other tech vendors, very much focused on sales enablement, whether it's a very small sales force from 300 to as large as 17,000. Now, some of the areas that we're going to look at, what are the changes that we're foreseeing that are going on with sellers? And that's also as, the market and technology and how B2B sellers work, B2B marketers and those sort of companies and the changes affecting them. Looking at some of the seller archetypes that we've looked at and how that may impact some of the ways that you want to be able to measure, understand, leverage relationships. What are the characteristics of the ideal consultative seller? How do those relate to the Forrester sales enablement action goals? And how can you use those goals as a way to interpret and understand what various solutions or technologies might be able to do for you? How do those key functions then relate to the sales enablement execution goals? And really understanding what are the 5 W questions that define a relationship, and thinking about the data and the measurements that have to take place with them in order to be successful in what you want to do. So if we look at the 4 seller archetypes, we published a report last year. The most recent version is the B2B Salesforce Digital Reboot. Some may remember the death of the B2B salesman. And it talks about that as business is transforming and changing, particularly in the digital era and focusing on customers, we're seeing a lot of changes, first forecast with numbers on some declining employment for different seller types within the U.S., but I believe we'll see this in the rest of the world. And the dimensions that are important to understand, and I think useful to think about in terms of how you interpret and understand your relationship with customers, how you measure that, what it means, and how it can feed into other analytics about what you should do with them, is we look at 4 essential buyer archetypes and 4 essential related seller archetypes. At the lowest level, low being in terms of complexity of the product as well as complexity of the buying decision, very commoditized. We have people who says, serve me. I mean, this is like when you buy online. It's very simple. This is what I want. When do I get it? You may not need a lot of interaction with the salesperson. There are sellers still working in this space, but we sort of typify them as order takers. Their set of skills is pretty well defined. They're pretty easy to come by, and they take the orders, and they may actually be replaced, depending on your business model, by a fully digital engagement to complete that sell. At a higher level of product service, but the buyer dynamic is still relatively simple, is to be able to explain more complex solutions. Maybe there's more options involved. Maybe there's more alternatives. Maybe the pricing is more complex in terms of how do you configure a price and quote and fit it to the particular environment. And that's where sellers as explainers become useful as well. But as more and more content is available online, as it's possible to find out and go other places and see what it means and map it all out, the range of what an explainer has to explain is shrinking. It may be just, do you have any questions left that you need to be able to understand, and maybe just focus on some of the pricing issues or support issues that may be surrounding that solution. At a higher level of complexity in terms of the buyer dynamic, they're trying to figure out what they want to do. I need some guidance into what's going to fit. What do I need? How does this map to my organization? How can you help me build support for this in my organization? Because it's always important to remember in the B2B sell, we're not just selling to a person, we're selling to an organization. So what those relationships are and all of that has to be taken into account. And that's where a seller who could be viewed as a navigator comes into play, where they understand not just the solution, but they start understanding something of the industry and something of the processes for several different kinds of typical buyer profiles and how to help them navigate those processes to be able to do it. At the highest level, for the most complex solutions, probably the most expensive solutions, as well as the buyer dynamic that is very complex in terms of competition or evaluating, does this fit a large number of requirements or across a wide array of alternatives with different degrees of overlap. You have a buyer that's really trying to become educated, to become enlightened, to understand more about how this could transform their business or fix a deep underlying problem. And that's where the consultant seller becomes important. And this is actually the only group that we foresee expanding, even though it's the smallest population to begin with. But they've got the biggest deals, which means they probably have the biggest customers. You put that together and they've probably got the biggest revenue. But they have to work on a much more complex level to interact. While a consultant could be an order taker when necessary, or an explainer or a navigator, it's much more difficult for those other seller types to become consultant sellers. And that could become a long-term planning consideration as you segment your markets, segment your solutions, and understand what you need to know. And especially as you learn what it is that your consultant sellers need to know, it becomes a much more interesting situation. When we look at the characteristics of the consultative seller, we can say a number of things. They embrace technology, they share new ideas, they understand the business or the industry, they can communicate well, they look for collaboration, they leverage data. But more than that, I think you have to understand what are the things there that you can measure, both on an outbound basis and even an inbound basis, to understand where they're getting that information and what they're doing. Think about sharing new ideas. That's not just about them having new ideas. That's about marketing in your organization, making sure those consultative sellers have the new ideas to share, have the content to be able to go out and engage in those conversations. Thinking about communicating effectively. We can measure that by emails. We can measure that by frequency of phone calls. You may not be able to measure all content within them, but you can have an understanding of what content did they use to communicate, how often are they doing it, with whom are they communicating, what is their importance based on your understanding of that organization as a buyer and where they work. It can be measured. Seeking collaboration can be measured as well. Who else do they talk to in the target organization? What are the parts of it in terms of that consensus and building that team? But you could also look internally to be able to say, who are they talking to in your organization? Maybe that helps you define who are the go-to people that are answering the most questions from the field. That's good to know. Even better to know is, how are they answering those questions? Is it the right information? Are there other people you could develop to be that? Can you structure collaboration so it can help during complex sales cycles to get the right information at the right time to the right people? And leveraging data. That's also about, if I'm gathering all that information, wouldn't it be good for the seller to have a view of how they're engaging with those accounts, especially if they're taking over a new account? Or if you're a sales manager and you're trying to see for the team what's going on. Or again, back to the seller, I want to see across multiple accounts what looks like the hot prospect, not just what feels that way, what's the finger I put to the wind to put something into the forecast, but where can I actually measure different levels of engagement that are going on to see what's happening. And that's why those four areas in particular are circled, because they all can produce data that needs to be able to be measured and understood and looked at so that it can be measurable, but also to understand if the related actions taking place are repeatable and scalable. Because that's how you can determine not just what took place, but you can determine, is the seller being efficient? Are there ways that you can further simplify their task so they can concentrate more on selling? And if it's scalable, they can do it more often. Or maybe over time, as certain products or solutions go through a life cycle, the lessons learned and how you engage can become increasingly digitized, subject to non-human intervention, being able to say, here's what we think we need now, or suggest additional things to sell as a cross-sell and an upsell, or even start feeding into some analytics that can actually predict where things are going to be hot based on, you know, some of the sources that could tell you what's going on with the relationship, to some of the sources telling you what's happened in the past, to start predicting what's going to take place in the future. So the sales enablement execution goals at Forrester are a way we look at to interpret what are things that need to be done. These could be accomplished via technology. They could be accomplished via processes. But it sets the stage for understanding if you're going to enable sellers, what are the areas that you need to think about. So we talk about develop, which particularly for the consultative seller is not so much about knowledge, at least in terms of products, as it's about skills, about how to absorb knowledge, about how to engage in conversation. It's also about sales managers being able to be informed and to be able to notice and to be able to be told and prescribed when to go and do some coaching, because you can see what's happening, not just depending on waiting to hear about it after the fact. Positioning is about all the work that has to be done to spin the story for a particular customer based on their specific needs, leveraging content that exists, but as well as being able to customize that, adapt that on the fly, or think about all the content that you want your consultative sellers to engage with that is not going to be in a presentation, that is not going to be in a white paper or some other standalone piece of content, but it's going to be conversational. Align tells you about, are you staying in tune with the customer? That may be internal sources or looking at how you're engaging with them or other information that you have. That often includes third-party information. There may be news alerts to tell you that something happened. They have filed financial results. You may have social selling, listening, that is telling you that, oh, look, so-and-so just got a new job. They got a promotion. It's about all those sources of information that keep you current with what's going on with the customer. Because you may find out, gee, last month I had a great relationship with the customer, engaging frequently. All of a sudden it dropped off. Why? They got a new job, or they left the company, or there's been another sort of reorg. So it's not just enough your internal sources, you have to look externally. Locate is about helping sellers find the information that they need. The real goal here is to be able to prescribe information based on what you know is going on. So sellers don't have to go looking. They don't have to think about what to find. It finds them and further simplifies their life. Engage is really all about measuring how is that content being used, who's using it, what other communications are going on. You know, are things warm? Are they cold? What's happening with that buyer? What are all the different ways you can measure that and report on it? And finally, assemble, particularly later in the sales process, if you're doing RFIs or RFPs, you know, if you're building proposals, what's the level of customization and personalization to build the information that's going to exactly map to the position of the customer to better align with them to help get that deal closed. That also means finding a lot of content that's going to feed into that, but maybe also building the processes to ensure you've got collaboration and can measure that inside your organization to be able to say who is looking at this proposal, how is it being approved, is it the right content depending on the regulatory environment for your industry, to go out to make sure that you're keeping everything aligned, that you've got all of your ducks in a row to go forward with that. So the functional areas that we see in a lot of solutions, and nobody covers all of them yet. Some cover them, several of them well, and some areas like reporting and some of the analytics are best served by some more specialized vendors that can work with some other areas like content management. So we look at content management as one area, all that sales content as well as internal content. It might be competitive information. It might be just who do you go for content to find out. Measuring engagement, all of the analytics about that. Is there data that's being produced by other solutions that could tell you more, that could feed in as part of a larger picture on that? Describing actions based on how I've tagged content, based on what I'm seeing. Can I build some programmatic rules that will tell me what to prescribe to do next, either to the seller to say, send this or attach this content or ask these questions, Or to the manager to say, you need to talk to this particular seller about what they're doing, and here's the improvement, or recommending training. Anything that prescribes action and doesn't just leave them at loose ends trying to figure out what to do. Reporting is obviously critical at so many levels. The data being collected by the solutions, being combined and integrated across multiple sources to give the fullest picture possible of what's happening with that customer. And the user experience, if it's a separate portal that somebody has to go to, it may not get used so much. Can it integrate with the CRM? Is it transparent? Does it just show up in time to suggest? Is the reporting easy to understand? Can it be easily exported? And all of them, you should be able to ask, can I measure what's going on? Can I repeat what's working? And can I scale it to get more value from that? If you map some of those functional areas across the enablement execution goals, it's pretty easy to see that, goals and functions don't map one-to-one, but they all apply everywhere. Content management obviously applies in the places you see it here, and you can go down through. What's interesting is when you think it through, engagement, measuring that at all different levels and dimensions, hits everything in those content areas because it pulls everything in. That's the whole point, to be able to do a better job communicating with the buyer, with the assumption that the better you communicate, the more you can stay attuned with their needs, the better you'll be able to sell. Another way to think about it is to think, you got to keep answering the 5W questions. This comes from journalism. But, who are you talking to? That means mapping relationships. What are you saying? What's the content that's being used? How often? What are the results? When do you do it? You could have some great content, but if it's too early in the sales cycle, it's the wrong time to do it. The opposite could happen as well. Where is it being done? Meaning, is it being distributed via email? Is it by phone? What's happening face-to-face? Some content is better suited to different ways to present. And why are you doing it? What is working? Why is that working? How does it tie to your brand value, your brand message, your value proposition? How can you reinforce and build that to make that better? So that's a quick introduction to some of the broad categories here with a focus on that consultative seller to give them the basis with the goal or the grail of reaching a perfect understanding of what's going on with their customer. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to our friends at TrustSphere, and we'll continue forward. Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction, Stephen. I would like to now welcome Tony from RSVP Selling and Glenn from CRM Online to share their insight.
Hey Mark, thank you so much. I'm just getting my screen to display, so everybody should be able to now see my slides. Hey Stephen, I really appreciated that presentation, especially the comments on how important consultative selling is in being able to add the level of value that's needed for sellers today, and also on enabling salespeople. There's been a lot of talk in recent times about the proposition that relationship selling is dead. I certainly believe that it's not dead. Wherever there's high complexity or risk for the client, or it's a big investment that they're making, relationships continue to be incredibly important. Just a little bit of background about myself. I've got 3 decades of experience in professional selling and leading companies and sales organizations in both Asia Pacific and North America. 2.5 years ago, I left the corporate world, and I've gone out on my own as an author, blogger, and keynote speaker. I work with dozens of organizations such as Oracle and LinkedIn themselves. I've got more than 40,000 followers of my blog and LinkedIn, and was recently recognized as the #1 influencer of professional selling in Asia Pacific. So I don't say that to puff myself up, but just to let you know that the information I'm sharing with you really comes from a solid base of real-world experience in the marketplace. Let me just say at the outset that the great disruption of professional selling is absolutely upon us. It's already happening to professions such as legal and accounting and taxation. When we look at the ability of innovative technology embracing new startups to enter markets and disrupt established competitors, when we look at the relentless drift of all high-value solutions with them drifting toward commoditization, it's a serious problem for organizations, especially when you look at the economic barriers being dismantled with people being able to offshore. I recently wrote an article for US Magazine about an apocalyptic sales extinction. I wrote it very much as satire, but a lot of people actually thought that it was really dead serious. So salespeople need to really address the issue of the value that they provide, because at the end of the day, they've got to fund their own roles. I personally believe that up to 1/3 of business-to-business salespeople won't have roles within about 3 to 5 years. Let me just say one thing that's really important, and that is that all of us as human beings and even as marketing departments within organizations are really wired to talk about who we are, what we do, and how we do it. And in Stephen's previous presentation there, he talked about that journalism framework. But in my view, that's a very big mistake in the market for salespeople as they try and build pipeline and drive revenue. We need to move away from talking about who we are, what we do, and how we do it, to instead get really good, and Stephen alluded to this, get really good at leading with why a conversation really matters. The other thing I'll say about relationship selling, and relationships are incredibly important, is that most salespeople make the mistake, A, of having that wrong conversation, but also of selling at the wrong level. The people that most easily meet with us are often the wrong people for us to actually be engaged with. So very important for us to recognize that although relationships are important, they're not enough. We also need to actually provide the necessary value. Let me just give you a really quick example of how I think sellers need to actually change the way they operate. So there's two parts of my brief presentation. One is salespeople need to change how they operate in building their own pipeline and being more effective in how they sell. And the second thing is that sales organizations need to enable salespeople and create great customer experience more effectively. I personally believe that sales managers are the weak link in the revenue chain in most organizations. But just for now, let me focus on salespeople. So this really is the traditional selling model where sellers are seeking to interrupt and really push a message to a prospect. Marketing and a lot of marketing automation tools and products really adopt this approach as well. And you can see in that top line of arrows there, it's really what goes on in the customer's world. Something triggers their interest in changing state or changing supplier, and they go through their own process of considering change and doing some research. They'll typically, decide that there's someone that they prefer, and then they'll formally go to market and get quotes, even if it's a formal tender process. So that's a fairly simple illustration of it, but we need to move away from the interrupt and push to instead attract and engage. And I've created a framework for that around leveraging social media. For anybody that's in the business-to-business market, LinkedIn is certainly the #1 platform with well over 400 million people on the platform and an ability to gain insights and engagements that's really unparalleled. So we need strong, personally attractive brands. We need to learn to lead with insights. Stephen actually talked about that in that top right-hand corner of the quadrant. So we need to adopt an insight-led approach. When we take this to more complex business-to-business selling, this is just a different representation, the similar process. We all know that it's hell to be involved in responding to people's demands where there's a focus on price, and we really tend to be blocked. What marketing organizations working with sales tend to do is they'll try and adopt a content publishing strategy so that them and their brand and solutions will come up earlier in the process. And obviously you want to focus on content that really attracts people when they're considering change. But my advice here for salespeople is we need to stop looking at the sales process in terms of what we're seeing on that slide and instead start to think about the fact that success is when the customer has implemented our solution and is live realizing the benefits of it. And we need to obviously do loss reviews in business to figure out how to stop losing against competition in competitive environments, but a far more powerful exercise is to actually do win reviews. So I recommend that anyone new to a selling organization needs to make sure they understand why their best customers became customers at all. But more importantly, why did they go to market to actually change states? Not why did they buy from us competitively, but why did they go to market at all? Because if we understand those trigger events, it enables us to truly be strategic. So if someone asks me, what does it mean to be strategic in selling, that list that you can see on the bottom left-hand area of this slide really actually defines that. So the ability to engage with a client when they're in this untroubled and unaware state, where there is nevertheless a better way for them to do business is really important. And we need to ask ourselves the question, what do our potential clients look for before they'd ever know to look for us. And sellers need to personally start to create content that shows those insights. So let me just move now from the individual salesperson to selling organizations. I've worked with organizations on helping them implement CRM. I'm going to talk about CRM specifically in a moment, but this in my mind is the holy grail of sales enablement. Obviously we need salespeople that are able to execute at the level that I just talked about in those previous slides, but salespeople and organizations need to also have a methodology that's driving their specific sales process. So if you want to know what a methodology is, it really informs the decisions about why you do what you do in a sales strategically, who it is that you choose to engage and how you engage them. And then the process piece is all of those things that you need to do to qualify a prospect, to do discovery, to provide decent proposals, take the risk as much as possible out of trials or evaluations, and close and onboard clients. So we need a methodology, and I've created one myself. It was when I was managing director of a technology company, and what I discovered is that there's 4 key areas that people need to cover to win deals. They absolutely need relationships at the right level. They then need a strategy for managing those relationships and dealing with the competition. But the third piece is they need to create best value for the client. Stop projecting a value proposition, but understand how the client really defines value and assesses risks themselves. And the last piece in RSVP is process alignment, to really understand how the customer evaluates, selects and procures. So if you've got that sort of methodology driving your process of qualification, discovery, doing proposals, that's really important. But the third piece is you need to enable all of this inside technology. And there is no better technology out there than customer relationship management software, CRM software. But what needs to happen is sales managers need to coach people around methodology and process and strategy inside that platform. And one of the things that really excites me is that I came across Sugar CRM and Glenn Richmond from CRM Online that have taken a really amazing approach to enabling all of this inside a very open and powerful platform, and then adding the relationship analytics that we'll talk about at the end here. So let me just talk about a very inconvenient truth. And all of the analysts agree that the majority of CRM implementations fail. Now, they don't fail because the technology doesn't work. They fail because the company implementing the technology, the end customer of it, wasn't clear about what they want to achieve. One of the common things I see is people making the mistake of thinking that they need to put a CRM system in, but they're not clear about what they want to achieve by doing so. And some examples of why you'd put a CRM in is maybe that you want a single source of truth and an enablement platform for creating great customer experience and managing customer lifecycle. Maybe you need to put a CRM system in because you're wanting to reduce customer churn and better manage renewals. Maybe it is because forecast accuracy isn't really good enough inside the organization, but at the end of the day, to be successful, you've got to implement CRM in a way that serves salespeople and customers and brings the organization together, especially sales and marketing. Jason Jordan is a friend of mine that I know in business. This is an excellent book for any sales manager, Cracking the Sales Management Code, but he makes the point that 83% of what we tend to measure inside CRM systems are things that cannot be managed. And it really begs the question, why are we measuring it if we can't manage it? We need to learn to focus on what's important. So with my own methodology that's been used to deliver hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue for clients around the world, one of my clients last year won an individual opportunity well over $100 million using this methodology. But what it does is it creates a focus on what really matters. It provides the signal amidst all of the noise. But what I want to focus on here really is predominantly the issue of relationships. So we need to build relationships with the right people, and one of the important things is that salespeople will tend to put the names of contacts in the partner organizations and prospects and customers that are part of the process of deciding or renewing with us. And it's easy to think that just because we've got a contact with somebody that we actually have a positive relationship. So one of the really important things in managing any opportunity or managing an account is really to do relationship mapping. So what I'd like to do in a moment is hand over to Glenn Richmond from CRM Online, but what Glenn did is he took my methodology and he's applied it to the process of qualification, discovery, in essence playbooking the way that a sale unfolds, prompting the salesperson to ask the right questions at the right time to provide that right piece of insight or collateral at that stage of the sale. But really importantly, which he'll show you, is this issue of relationship mapping. Do we really understand the power base, the political complexity inside an organization? And then using TrustSphere, Glenn's also integrated relationship analytics. So in essence, we can really get a sense of how real are these connections. Are they just connections and contacts, or is there a positive relationship there? And then for sales managers to use all of that information and insight to be able to coach salespeople, create actions to progress the sale, de-risk the opportunity, create a win plan or a close plan to make sure that forecasting is accurate, and at the end of the day provide reporting out of a CRM system that's actually trusted by all of the organization. So with that, I'd like to introduce Glenn Richmond. He's the CEO of CRM Online. They're one of the most successful and most awarded partners for Sugar CRM in the world. I had the privilege of being on Glenn's board for a period of time, and he's going to talk about how he's integrated the RSVP selling methodology with TrustSphere to deliver some incredible outcomes. Over to you, Glenn.
Great. Thank you for that, Tony, and look, great outline of the various challenges that we face in business-to-business selling. So look, as Tony said, we're looking. What we've done is we've taken Tony's methodology, which for us was a real eye-opener when we were exposed to it, and really enabled us to start winning some bigger deals, and we've embedded it into Sugar CRM. So our platform provides a number of different tools that align with the RSVP selling methodology. So specifically the tool set that we provide within Sugar CRM to support the methodology includes a qualification tool, a sales playbook, an organisational chart, influence map, and a close planner. And what we're going to be focusing on today is the organisational chart and the influence mapping within an opportunity, which is really where TrustSphere comes into its own in terms of supporting our methodology. So what we're actually looking at here is a view of our influence mapper within a particular account. So what we're actually looking at here is that our sales rep, in this case for the account Del Boomi, has gone and mapped out, these are all the stakeholders that I think that we're dealing with within this opportunity. Okay, and what we're actually doing there is that we're leveraging the TrustSphere data to identify where the missing link is. So as a sales manager, historically I've had to trust that that my sales rep is putting in a complete picture of an organisation or a set of influencers into our CRM. So when I'm doing a deal review and I'm looking at all of our stakeholders and who we need to influence, I'm assuming that that data is correct. What TrustSphere actually does, and Manesh is going to, Manesh from TrustSphere is going to outline exactly how this works in the next set of slides, but what TrustSphere actually does is it analyzes the communications that are going on between your staff, your users, and your actual prospects and customers, and highlights the relationships that are occurring between those individuals. So what that allows us to do at a methodology level is it allows us to query TrustSphere and say, who have we been talking to as an organisation at Dell? Okay, and then we go and compare that against the data that's in our CRM, and what we're able to do is get a list of, here are all of the people that we're talking to that we haven't catered for within our particular organisational chart and influence map. So what it's actually prompting us to do is to say, me as a sales manager, that says these are people that we need to incorporate into the system and understand their role within the organisation, so that when we're selling and engaging with that organisation, we don't have effectively a black hole of information because we don't understand all of the relationships that are going on. If we think about you know, how these complex opportunities happen, often you'll have individuals that are CC'd or copied on an email that that we haven't necessarily met as a salesperson, where we don't understand their role necessarily, and it's very easy to miss those individuals when we're mapping out our opportunity. This highlights those and brings those to the forefront, so that we can then look at what their role is, potentially reach out and engage with them and understand how we should be engaging with them. Okay, so that was the previous screen. What we're now looking at is another way that TrustSphere can support us in our methodology. So what we're actually looking at here is our opportunities at risk dashboard. Okay, so this what the RSVP methodology within Sugar actually does is it escalates opportunities that are at risk to a central dashboard for our sales manager to prompt them to then go and review those opportunities and ideally coach our sales reps on any weaknesses within those opportunities. So the way that we escalate those opportunities is we look at things like a poor qualification score versus a late sales stage. So if we're, for example, if the sales rep's telling us that an opportunity is in negotiation, but we have a poor qualification score on our relationships, or we don't understand the buying process, we're going to escalate that. Okay, but what TrustSphere actually allows us to do here, which is well above anything else that that we've been able to do in the past, is it allows us to escalate opportunities based on sales stage combined with lack of communication. Okay, so if we're in negotiation within a deal and we're not talking to someone within that organisation, let's say every day, every week at least, that's a big red flag to say, hang on, our sales guy is saying this opportunity's all sorted, but they're not talking to our prospect, talking to our customer, which is putting that deal at risk. So when, you know, for me personally, if a deal's in negotiation stage, I want my reps to be talking to the customer at least every couple of days to make sure that we are understanding any risks and any opportunity, any factors within that opportunity that may affect the outcome. Okay. Now, what this final slide is actually covering is in our influence map. What TrustSphere actually allows us to do is it allows us to understand clearly the level of coverage that we have with each of our stakeholders. So what we actually have here, and we can see in that drop down there, is that we have we actually look at, okay, who are the influencers within our opportunity, and how strong is our level of communication, our level of coverage, and therefore our relationship with those individuals. What TrustSphere allows us to do, it gives us what's called a relationship score, and so we can instantly see who are our key influencers where our relationship is not strong enough. And again, as a sales manager, that allows me to coach my sales rep and say, okay, you don't have a good relationship with the technical buyer. You need to have our CTO reach out to that technical buyer and build that relationship so that we are strengthened within that opportunity and we remove that risk item from the opportunity. So look, really those are three key areas where TrustSphere really empowers the sales methodology, and we're able to leverage that technology to really help us win more deals and get more revenue into our cycle. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Manesh Goel, the CEO of TrustSphere, who will be able to run through the TrustSphere platform, how it works, and the value that it offers the customers.
Thanks, Tony and Glenn. As Glenn said, we have going to hand the conversation now over to Manish from TrustSphere, who will be discussing the relationship analytics for sales.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you very much, Glenn. Also, Tony and Steve, the presentation so far have been very interesting, extremely valuable when it comes to explaining how how the whole process of selling has become much more complicated. So my name is Manish Goel. I'm the CEO of TrustFair. Today I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about, extend from what Steve as well as Tony and Glenn have said, and talk a little bit about how relationship analytics is being used to transform the overall sales process. I mean, we heard a lot about engagement, we heard a lot about enablement, and we heard a lot about relationships. And at the end of the day, I think as Steve said right up front, from a consultative selling is actually complex. And these days, what we're doing in organizations, particularly larger, with the larger deals, what we're doing is we're selling organization to organization. What that means is we're actually dealing people to people. And it's really about buyer networks and seller networks and understanding the dynamics of those networks. In that sense, relationships are key. And to a large extent, that's where we at TrustFair have developed a science that we call relationship analytics, which works together with both CRM systems as well as with smart methodologies such as the RSVP methodology in applications such as Glenn has put together on the Sugar platform. But let me start with just talking about relationship analytics. What is relationship analytics? So imagine this. Imagine you could understand from within your communication or within your communication environments, who's communicating with who, how frequently, what that velocity, what that direction, that cadence of communication looks like. What it would end up doing, it would end up looking like a social graph. And you see a picture here of a social graph. For an organization, what we're able to do is really understand and leverage probably one of the most important but hidden assets in the organization. It kind of lies latent at the moment. And what we're doing is we're building out we're finding every relationship that exists. What we're doing on top of that is with every single communication, single communication transaction that goes on, every email, voice call, or IM, we're rewriting that social graph such that you understand fully what's going on across your relationship network at any point in time. What we're doing is we're integrating that into CRM systems as well as sales enablement systems such as the RSVP application we have. So ultimately it's about bringing high quality data into an environment which is measurable data, which then can be used to augment the sales process. And the sales really are enabling sales teams to get a much better understanding of what's going on from an evidence perspective rather than just instinctively. As Tony mentioned, relationships. It's really critical to have relationships at the right levels, as well as basically being able to manage and engage those relationships. It's absolutely critical. The question becomes for teams who are working across geographies and across departments, how do they know what's actually happening within those relationships? At the end of the day, that's really what we're working with the team at RSVP to do. It's to bring together relationships as a critical part to help sort of solve that complex sales environment and those complex sales opportunities which teams are working on at any point in time. The way we're doing that is really by, as I said, measuring relationships, understanding engagement, and providing visibility of those relationships back to the overall teams. So again, as Tony had mentioned, I think relationships, both internal as well as external, are extremely important from a sales engagement perspective. And again, being able to put some science behind what those relationships are. Where are those relationships? Who are those relationships with? And how active and how strong are those relationships allows sales teams to take the methodology, the RSVP methodology, and take the whole process of sales enablement and sales engagement to the next level. Our thesis at TrustFair is really that an organization is an organization's relationships are really a proxy for its social capital. I mean, an organization is only as powerful as the sum of its network, its overall relationships, both the strength of its relationships internally, but more importantly, its strength and engagement with its relationships with customers, suppliers, and partners. One of the biggest problems with CRM systems, however, and CRM systems have been designed really to help organizations bring all of this together. But one of the biggest problems with CRM systems is actually salespeople. Salespeople, because CRMs are manual, what conventionally we find is around about 10% of all customer interactions even make it into the CRM. What that does, that really impacts the CRM, because what you end up with is patchy data in there. And with patchy data, decisions aren't made as effectively as they could if the data was complete. So where do salespeople typically operate? As we know, particularly in the B2B environment, sales teams operate in their heads, email, and voice. What we're able to do is go into the email and voice systems and actually extract from the email and voice systems what's happening within an environment, where all those relationships are and what's happening with those relationships, and we bring that data, only the data, without touching the content, only that data back into the CRM. What that does is it starts to complete the CRM, and it allows it to become a base of rich, complete data around customer engagement and customer relationships, which then allow other applications, such as the RSVP methodology, to really enable and enhance the process that's going on there. Again, what we're doing at the most macro level is understanding the fabric of an organization through its relationships. And the key point here is what we're doing is measuring the activity and measuring relationships. And that it's the science behind that which is very, very powerful and relatively unique. Let me talk to you about a couple of different ways that relationship analytics is transforming the overall sales process. So one of them is one application that we use is something that we call links within, and the problem it resolves is that sellers don't like doing cold calls, and there's a good reason that sellers don't typically like doing cold calls. It's because a cold call has a 2% success rate of getting to a next meeting, while a warm introduction has a 40% success rate. So how does what we do is what happens typically with a seller? As soon as a new leader, a new prospect comes in, what they do is they go out to LinkedIn. As Tony mentioned, LinkedIn is very, very powerful, but they look to see if somebody on LinkedIn, in their LinkedIn network, can introduce them to this particular prospect. Alternatively, what they do is they'll send a note out internally to everybody and say, hey, to their colleagues, and say, look, is there anyone who can introduce me to this particular person? What TrustSphere is able to do is very quickly, through its analytics capability and its understanding of the social graph, understand who within the organization already has a strong relationship and who has the strongest relationship with a prospect or a customer. And we're able to surface that very quickly both into Sugar CRM, into CRM systems, as well as in other applications, and instead of other applications. Really what we're doing there is using the power of an organization's latent asset to do one thing, which is find the best path to a prospect. So remove the serendipity and the guesswork from identifying who has the best relationship to making it, from a scientific perspective, identifying who actually has the strongest relationship with someone, and what is your best path to get to that particular prospect or that particular prospect or client. And it's also very valuable when you're looking at buyer networks and you're trying to expand a buyer network. Let's talk about a global account. It means that what you're able to do is very quickly understand if anyone who's not within the seller's own network, but within the organization as a whole, actually has a strong relationship or can be a path into somebody that we're trying to connect with at the buyer network end. Speaking of global account management, I mean, one of the biggest issues with global accounts is actually really understanding what the various touch points are. It's exceptionally difficult right now for individuals to, for an individual who's managing to understand every single touch point that exists with their client, and also understand what activity is happening and what's not happening. And that's particularly true within a B2B sales environment. What TrustSphere is able to do, again using analytics, is surface as a set of networks which can be visualized and explored. And what that does, again, it means that sales teams are able to collaborate much more effectively and much more efficiently by understanding where those networks actually are and the strength of the relationships. As you can see on some of the lines here, they're thicker and thinner lines which give you the sense as to whether relationships are stronger or weaker. It allows you, again, to understand the best path, as well as to understand what activity is going on with a particular account, such that you can manage it more effectively. Another area that we're that our clients find the analytics being very useful for is ensuring customer transitions are effectively managed. And I'll explain that situation. When sellers leave, and it's particularly peculiar to sellers, they tend to take their connections or their relationships with them. So if you think about the average sales organization turnover, an average salesperson has a tenure of between 3 and 4 years. That means most organizations have between a 25 and 33% turnover rate with their sales teams. But when people leave, the issue you end up with is a large degree of, from a customer continuity perspective, a discontinuity. What we're able to do at TrustFir is basically identify before a seller leaves, and as soon as you receive their notice, we have every single, we're able to print out, or at least we're able to surface every relationship they've had with any customer whilst they've been at the organization. We do that by understanding the communication flows that have been going on, and we allow a sales manager to transition that relationship to those relationships to the new seller before the actual seller, departing seller, leaves. Before you pay the last paycheck to that person, what you're able to do is transition those relationships over to the person who is going to take over that role. And that's really important, because at the end of the day, from a customer perspective, the things that clients dislike most is when they have to start training or have to start bringing new salespeople up to speed. What this allows is a much smoother transition smoother transition for that customer experience, and it can be done just as I said at the touch of a button. And finally, what I'd like to talk about is just the way that we're working with the RSVP selling team. Again, it's an incredibly powerful methodology, but really what we're able to do is, as Glenn had shown and Tony had discussed, from a strategic selling perspective, what's really important is to understand who are the key influences in the organization, how are they related, and what's the strategy towards getting getting the various individuals on site. What we're able to do is really provide provide visibility into the methodology around what activity is happening and what's not happening, what the strength of relationship is and whether it's sufficient or not, and effectively enable teams who are working across global accounts to better get a sense as to whether the strategy that they're executing is effective or whether attention needs to be paid to another area. At the end of the day, what we're doing is, in terms of a mashup, Tony used the term mashup. What we're doing is really mashing up our relationship analytics capability into the RSVP platform. Together, these become very, very powerful. And an analogy on this is, if you look at look at the map that RSVP provides, it's almost like let's just call it a Google Maps. What we are is the traffic analysis on top of Google Maps, which allows you to identify a couple of things where problems are occurring or where things are going as expected, and that makes it extremely, extremely powerful. We do integrate into CRMs. There's a case study which is available on our website. The two key points that I'll make here are, there's a client of ours, a technology client of ours. What they found is by using our technology, they could increase the number of connections, the number of relationships in the CRM by 70%. And that's quite powerful, because what that does is it helps both sales and marketing have a much better sense as to what that overall network or that social capital is for an organization. Effectively, as our client says, it moves the CRM from being a customer records management system to being a customer relationship management system. And at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're actually completing the CRM and enabling sales teams to operate with evidence rather than just purely on instinct.